Hi, good evening, and welcome to this panel discussion on writing and inspiration and finding inspiration. We've got three brilliant guests for you tonight, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into the chat and for them to tell us their experiences of being a writer. So if you have any questions for our writers, if you put them in the chat box, we'll try and get to them during the course of the conversation. Anna's going to introduce our first guest.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to introduce Pam Williams. Hi, Pam.
Hi there.
Hi. So Pam is a Londoner of Grenadinian heritage. Married for 33 years, she's also a mother and grandmother. In 1984, Pam graduated from St Martin's School of Art with a degree in fashion and spent the next 2 decades working as a magazine fashion editor and journalist on titles including She and Now, then as a freelance stylist. She retrained as a teacher in 2017 and currently leads the post-16 provision at a special school in Westminster. Pam was selected for the coveted place on the London Writers' Award mentoring programme in 2019 and won the short story contest Black Ink magazine New Writing Prize 2022. Her debut novel, A Trace of Sun, was published this March and longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. Welcome, Pam.
Hi.
And we also have Kate Sawyer with us this evening. Hi, Kate.
Hi.
So, Kate worked as an actor and theatre and events producer before writing several short films and then turning her hand to fiction. Her debut novel, The Stranding, was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, won the East Anglian Fiction Prize, and was adapted for BBC Radio 4 Book at Bedtime. And it's being developed for TV by Fremantle and Afua Hirsch's production company, Born in May. Her second novel, This Family, is a Waterstones Book of the Month. When Kate isn't writing or talking to other authors about their writing practices for her podcast Novel Experience, she is busy producing the annual Bury St Edmunds Literature Festival, coming very soon. After 20 years living in London, she recently returned to her native East Anglia, where she lives with her young daughter.
Hi. And finally, we'd like to welcome Disha Bose. Hi, Disha.
Hi.
Disha was born and raised in India. She worked in the tech industry for a few years before deciding to pursue her dream of writing a novel. She lives in Ireland now. Dirty Laundry, her debut novel, was published in March 2023, and her second novel, I Will Blossom Anywhere, is due May next year. Welcome.
Hi. So, before we kick off with some questions, each of our panelists are going to do us a short reading. So we're going to start with Pam this evening. If you could just introduce your book and tell us about the part that you're reading from.
Okay, so A Trace of Sun is about Cilla and Rafe, a mother and son of Grenadian heritage, who are part of the Windrush generation. And the book is basically based on the trauma of separation when mum has to come to England and Rafe gets left behind, and it kind of follows their journey after that. But the small piece I'm going to read is Cilla remembering an event from her past. It was Easter Sunday and Cilla's 19th birthday. "We're going to the beach," she said in reply to Aunt May querying why she was getting ready for church so early. Tongues would tattle reasons for her absence, her aunt warned, after chastising her blasphemous actions. She didn't mention it was Sonny who suggested it, released the idea, and that, like a fluttering butterfly, it had kept returning to her mind. For once, she wanted her birthday to be different from every other ordinary day. Special. Isadora baked a cake for her, and they wrapped slabs in parchment and packed them in the basket, along with a zabuka, some mangoes, soursop and custard apple, a hunk of boiled ham, quickly sliced off when her aunt wasn't looking, and roast bakes, still warm. 19, a big woman. She inspected her face in the looking glass, ran fingers across its smoothness, searched for evidence of change. Del said she was getting old, teased her with, "Hey, why are you and Sonny taking long so? All this time and no child yet?" She shifted baby Carlton in her arms to emphasize her point. That life not for me, no? She'd thought, picturing girls she knew, young mothers, with a child on their hip and hunger in their belly, struggling on their own on an island too full of women for men to choose from. Carlton wasn't even 3 months, and his father was sidestepping out of his life already. She held her tongue. The group left home in darkness for the winding downhill stroll. Crickets chirruped. Dew rested on heavy leaves. Cockerels were yet to herald the day. Scylla breathed the world in, revelled at its peace. They were ready to venture into the water when the sun crept up where sky met sea to spread its glory across the vast surface. Hands in Sunny's tight grip, Scylla studied him, rivulets of disbelief coursing through her. "Well, answer na," he said. "What do you think I go say?" Rising onto her toes, she slipped her arms around him. Yes, I could be your wife." He twirled her through the air. Her skinny, outstretched legs felt weightless, then trembled as if they no longer belonged to her when he placed her back on the sand. Isadora rushed to embrace her. Dara released a burst of, "Why, me baby sister go get married." Frank, the one other person there with them, walked wordlessly to the water's edge, trailed there by Isadora's besotted eyes. The moment replayed like a film. Hand over each of them, actors poised for the clapperboard to command action. Scylla saw her grin widen as large as Sunny's, how she'd grabbed for Isadora's hand to keep her close, stop her following where her gaze led, squeezed her fingers so hard she thought she heard the knuckles crack. Wanted to warn her, not knowing how. That man go rupture your heart. A telepathic message that failed to fly. She thought now. I did never imagine Sonny go break mine. She snatched at the cord and let the blind slap down.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Pam. And next up, can we hear from Kate, please? And Kate, if you could, so you're reading from this family, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going to read from this family, and I'm going to read from the beginning because I was a bit aware of spoilers, but also for anybody that hasn't read the book, it sort of sets it up. It's set over the course of 24 hours in a garden in the middle of East Anglia, which is where I live. And it is about a family coming back together, and it's told from 7 different perspectives. I'll explain why I said 9 later on. It's told from 7 different perspectives. And this is Mary, who is getting married and is the matriarch of the family. Oh, I apologise to anyone that's Scottish, because I'm going to do a Scottish accent at some point. It is the stillness, this blanket of heat that lies so heavily over everything, which renders the radio in the kitchen audible. At the end of the garden, under the willow, if there were even a light breeze, at this distance she wouldn't be able to hear it at all. Now, in the stultifying stillness of midday, on this worryingly warm September day, it is just possible to make out the words, to decipher the news stories. The hottest September day since records began. She feels bad for her relief. She knows that it's all wrong, that she should be worrying about climate change or climate catastrophe. Ordinarily, she does. They even did a test drive in an electric car a few months ago. But today, she can't help but be delighted that it's sunny. Sunny and warm. It feels like a blessing. A wave of nausea washes over her. There is something almost awful about being this excited. It's remarkably similar to terror. Or maybe it is terror. For all the reassurances she's had, still lurking beneath the fizz of excitement is the unshakable presentiment that bringing this family together can only end in disaster. "It is my dearest wish," she'd written, in the same green ink with which she addressed each of the letterpressed invitations, "that after so long apart, I am able to bring this family together for my wedding day. I don't think it's my way to ask much of others, but now I am asking each of you to give me one day where you leave any animosity at the gate and try to remember that you love each other." When all 3 of the girls' RSVPs arrived in the affirmative, she was delighted. But she's since wondered if any of them had turned over the card and seen her note. No, they all have their differences, their problems. But she raised these 3 women. None of them is the sort of person who would ruin her wedding day. Are they?
Thanks, Kate.
Welcome.
So then we are moving to Disha, and Disha, you're going to read from Dirty Laundry for us.
Yes. So Dirty Laundry it's a sort of domestic drama is how I would describe it. And the three main characters are these three young mothers who live in this small Irish village. And one of them is found dead at the start of the book. And the rest of the novel then kind of uncovers who might be the potential murderer or person responsible for her death. And I'm reading from chapter 8, which is the section where Mishti has just moved to Ireland. She is an Indian woman in an arranged marriage, and she's just moved to Ireland with her husband, who's a psychiatrist. And in this section, she's meeting Kira, who's her neighbor. Kira had been pregnant with Bella when Mishti and Parth moved into the house down the street. Parth was away a lot, working long hours or on trips to Dublin, Belfast, and Mayo for conferences. Mishti found herself alone most of the time. Kira would appear at her door to make insignificant small talk, stroking her big round belly, reminding Mishti she herself was yet to conceive. Her mother-in-law had mentioned it a few times when Parth handed her the phone on Sundays. In between asking about the cooking and cleaning, his mother talked about the box of Parth's childhood clothes she was saving to pass down to her grandson, and the Ayurvedic tea Mishti should be drinking for fertility. Every time she met Kira at the door, Mishti was struck by how different they were, by how sociable Kira was, how she knew to be polite and welcoming towards a new neighbor. Kira's body was blossoming in a way only a pregnant woman's could. Cheeks like red shiny apples, skin translucent and shimmering like mother of pearl, arms lean but soft. Mishti hadn't begun putting on weight yet, but she was self-conscious even then. Her haircut was basic, just to keep her curls manageable, and her knuckles were chapped by the cold, dry air. She was suddenly very aware of the fine dark hairs growing on her fingers. Fancy a walk? We could both do with some fresh air, Kira said one day. They had only ever chatted casually at Mishti's doorstep so far. Mishti reached for a thin cardigan hanging by the door, trying not to appear too eager. Kira laughed, but not unkindly. We need to get you a good raincoat. In fact, you need a couple of coats. Something practical for our walks and something lovely for when we go out. Something waterproof and something in a wool blend. Mishti was too ashamed to tell her she didn't have the money for these clothes. She would have to wait and find the right opportunity to ask Parth, and even then, she didn't know if he'd agree it was money well spent. A few days later, Kira turned up at the house again, this time dressed in a beautiful turquoise coat that wrapped elegantly over her growing belly. Diamonds studded her earlobes. She wasn't dressed for a walk. Shall we? Where are we going? Shopping. I know a lovely little place in the city that has everything you need. You'll see. Kira looped her arm through Mishti's before she even had a chance to lock the front door. She was anxious getting in Kira's car. It smelled of her perfume, floral and immaculate, and there was already a baby seat fitted in the back. It had to be now. Mishti knew she needed to say something before they were on the road, and it was too late. Maybe some other day, she blurted, when Kira pressed the button that got the engine going. Kira checked the mirrors without looking at her, then started reversing. We're doing it today, Mishti. You need to stay dry. You need to get out of that house more. It'll be okay. I'm sorry, but you don't understand. I need to speak to Parth first. I do understand, Kira said. Then she reached for the dial and turned the music a little higher. Now, there's a scarf in the compartment there. You might want to tie it around your head if you don't want to mess up your head. She pressed another button and the roof of the car started to slide open. Mishti scrambled to get the scarf out, hurriedly tying it without knowing what she was doing or why. She'd never been in a car with the top down. She didn't have a chance to think about it, and they were already roaring around the bends. The wind whipped Kira's long hair, but she didn't seem to care. She was singing along to Kid Cudi's Pursuit of Happiness. It wasn't Mishti's kind of music, but she found herself laughing. It might have been her first instance of genuine laughter in Ireland. They didn't slow down until they hit the city. Then Kira lowered the music with a sigh. When cars pulled up around them at the traffic lights, people stared. We make an unlikely couple, don't we? Kira laughed, tapping her gold ring on the steering wheel lightly. Mishti had been thinking this too, wondering if this was the reason why Kira had chosen to be friends with her. She'd seen the comments on Kira's Instagram posts. Kira already had a small but dedicated band of followers back then. It was plain to see that Kira had her pick of friends, but none with quite the shock value of Mishti. If there was one thing she was learning about her new friend, it was that Kira loved it when people turned to look.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, all three of you. I absolutely love those books, and it's a real privilege to be able to hear them being read by the author. So we're going to get on to some more juicy questions around inspiration, but just to get us started, we've got some quick fire questions, which is who is your dream dinner party guest author? Pam, if we can start with you, who's your writer, favourite writer person?
So I would say at the moment Bernardine Evaristo, and partly because I was reading like a review or a blog post the other day, and their criticism of this author's work was that they felt they were trying too hard to write to win a prize as opposed to just writing the book. And I just thought that's a really odd thing to say. But Bernadine's won so many accolades, and she's such great success. I would love to know what she imagined her future as a writer would be when she first started out, and know more about her dreams and ambitions when she was younger. So yeah, that would be my choice.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can imagine she'd be a fantastic dinner guest as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen her interviewing people, and she's always so sort of personable. She's got a lovely sense of humor, and she just draws people in. Yeah, I think she'd be great.
I also imagine she wouldn't mince the words either, so yeah. I think it would be like a party dinner as well. Yeah. Kate, who would be your dinner guest?
I mean, I'd really, really like to talk to E.M. Forster about his work, but I feel like I would also be really intimidated. I find that, and that's true. Like, then I think about who else. I mean, Bernardine Evaristo. I think I would be quite intimidated to. I think basically what I'm saying is I'd probably have to have a good couple of glasses of wine while I was preparing the dinner party in order to relax me enough to just have a conversation rather than like hero worship if I were to be with any of the authors that I massively revere. And like A.S. Byatt, I would love to know about like the process of writing Possession, but I also feel like she would also be really petrifying to me, so
I think that's brilliant. So I think you've got a few in your canon that you'd like to come to your dinner party, but you're thinking you might be a little bit sloshed when you have your party.
I think it would be essential so that I wouldn't be like really nervous. It's a bit different like when I'm interviewing someone because it's like a professional gig. But if it was just me at a dinner party, that's quite scary.
Quite an intense situation anyway. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Disha, who's at your dinner party?
I think I'm the same. Who would I invite to my home, and what would I want my dinner table and my home to look like for that guest as well? I think Hilary Mantel. I would have really loved to speak with her. And also I'm thinking Sally Rooney now because it's Sally Rooney week. She's on my mind. I'd love to know. Yeah.
But also quite a petrifying guest.
Very.
Feels like.
Yeah.
Eat up her.
Yeah.
I feel like all these people would probably have the same feeling about their heroes as well. So it's kind of, it all goes around, doesn't it? Brilliant.
So this said that it's not before, before when we've asked this question and people just have very clear who it is. I like that with these conversations as well. It's also, what would you do in your home? What would your home look like? What are we going to cook for these people?
Yeah.
But before we derail completely onto interiors and what's on the menu, I'd like to ask you about inspiration. And so it struck me when you were all doing your readings, and I was kind of reminded about the different stories, how all of them are really kind of cemented in place. And so obviously you've got the village in Ireland and the garden in Suffolk, and then Pam, yours is kind of split between London and the Caribbean. And that I just sort of wondered, is place something that you find inspiration from? So Disha, can I ask that of you first?
It's interesting that you asked that, because I had this conversation with myself recently. Because I was on my way to India. We go annually back home, and before I left, I told myself, I'm going to come back with a story now. I'm going to go there. I'm going to have my next book. I'm going to be so inspired. And it's funny that I came back with not a story though, but I think what I was inspired by was the sort of the atmosphere and the vibe that I got in India, which I felt like I needed to reconnect with, which in itself is a character. And I think that's what I brought back. And I think that's what inspires me most, this sort of feeling that a place gives me. And I find it interesting to then kind of transport that emotion to a new place, which is what I kind of did with the first book, because one of the main characters is Indian who lives in Ireland. And I did something similar with the second book as well, which it just kind of brings the atmosphere and the sensations that I have about a place, and I put it in a completely different location and see how the characters would then behave. And I think that's what my place inspiration is usually. But it doesn't have to be a holiday or even like a beautiful view or any historical connection that I have with the place. It could just be a nice day out with my family, and I kind of try and reflect how I feel that day into words on the page. And it's hard to do most of the times, but yeah, I think that's where my inspiration usually comes from.
Pam, I know that when we spoke on the podcast, that the kind of the roots of this story are in family history, but so with that, that's how the place comes into it. But wondering if you draw inspiration from place as well.
Yeah, I think as Disha said, there's some places give you like a real vibe, and they create a sensation in you that you might then remember and put into a character. I remember going to the Seychelles and visiting the place, which was just beautiful and silent and spiritual. I'm not a very spiritual person, but it felt spiritual, and that's probably something that I will include somewhere along the line, because it's a feeling that's always stayed with me. So yeah, I do get inspiration from different places or different events, but with A Trace of Sun, as you said, I mean, the places in there are real. And I can remember going to Grenada when I was a child for the first time, and I still have the memory of what it felt like of being in this place. It was so different from London, and lush and green and hot and dark and sultry and all those different things. And it was really something that I wanted to really play on in the book, to show the different, the contrast between the two places, which kind of also shows a contrast in almost in the emotions of the character.
And Kate, sorry for you. I know obviously this family is set in Suffolk, but in your first book, a lot of that was in New Zealand, and actually you hadn't been to New Zealand at the time when you.
No, yeah, I mean, the choice to set it in New Zealand was because there were myriad reasons, but part of it was for it to be somewhere that I hadn't been but always wanted to go. I've now been there, because a lot of it is about trying to reach the thing that's beyond you, and that was one of the things that I'd felt. I was supposed to go there when I was 21, and I didn't make it for one reason or another, and so it's a bit like that, like the search for the thing beyond you. And this is set in the garden over the course of 24 hours, but it is punctuated, alternate chapters with 40 years of memories of each of the characters. And so they are located in LA, New York, France, London. So it's a little bit like Home and Away in a way, because it's not all, but some of them are at home as well, the memories. But I'm interested in that, like Disha says, of people being out in different environments, as much as I'm interested in perspectives, seeing the same places in different ways. And this my next book, which is coming out next year, is it's the story of a family told over nearly 100 years through their holidays. So that is, you know, a slice of life story that hopefully will hold together. But each of those locations are places that I know, but I certainly don't know them at the time that it was set. And so it was very research heavy in that respect. But then that's the same with The Stranding, because that was set in New Zealand that I didn't know, but also it was a post-apocalyptic New Zealand. So I couldn't have gone there anyway. So the geography I looked up, but the feelings were, and there's something really freeing in that, having the complete imaginative, you know, building it completely from imagination, whereas the other half of the book is set in London, East Anglia, places that I know and was living at the time. So yeah, it is important to me as like a grounding element, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the inspiration comes from it. It's like part of the building of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. For all three of you, your kind of different routes in as well. And I just wonder, like, from the beginning, I guess if we're talking about inspiration, what inspired you to come to writing in the first place? Have you always known you wanted to be a writer? Was that always writing novels or short stories, or, you know, what's your kind of journey into this been? So Disha, maybe if we start with you.
Yeah, as far back as I can remember, I had been writing. I think my parents still have my old notebooks for it. And I think I fashioned myself as this writer illustrator as well, because all the stories I wrote have these little pictures on the sides. I think I didn't know what I wanted to be at the time, but I was always making up stories. And my friends would say that I was a liar. But what I was doing was making up stories in a very fantastical way, I suppose, for a child. Um, and I think I just always had that in me. And I was a big reader. I was an only child, so you know the usual cliche of not having much company in the house, so it was just me and the books. And I suppose you know, in India and at the time, having writing as like a career goal for yourself was never an option. So I studied literature in school and college and all of that, but the only route out for me was to do content writing, which is kind of odd because the tech industry was kind of coming up and booming around the time. And that's what I got into. And writing took a complete back step for me. And, you know, in my 20s, when I had a social life, I was reading less. I was going out more. And then I had a child and I was reading even less. And writing, reading, the whole thing, I think, just took a back seat. And then okay, we were talking about this earlier, how I feel like having a child in the middle of the pandemic and being a mother for the first time was a very locked room experience for me. And it felt like this is the time to do it. If now, then when? And that's kind of what worked. I mean, I'd love to say that I was at my desk for the past decade trying to write, but I wasn't. I was literally trying to, I think it was always there in the back of my mind, but I never took it seriously. Um, yeah, I'm glad I did though. This time around.
How about you, Pam? What's your kind of relationship with
Um,
writing?
When I always had stories in me, and I wrote all the time. I remember as a sort of 6-7-year-old, I talked to myself a lot, and every inanimate object had a name, and they'd all be lined up, and they'd all have their lives, and there was always this constant imaginary play going on. Then that progressed into writing stories. It's probably in my teens when I started to really think, okay, maybe one day I would be a writer. But it was just, it was just like a sort of teenage dream. It didn't feel real, didn't feel achievable. But I kept on writing. I write poetry, I write short stories. And then after Maya Angelou died, because she was her book, I Know Why Caged Birds Sing, was one of the books that really made me think, as a Black woman, I could be an author, because I hadn't really read books by Black women before that. So she was kind of like the start of the dream. And then when she died in 2014, I still hadn't actually done anything. And I'd written lots and lots of stuff. I'd written a couple of novels, but I never let anyone read my work. And it suddenly occurred to me that you can't be a writer if nobody reads it. So that was when I started going to the workshops and really started, honing my craft. But there was always that secret dream of, I'd love to walk into a bookstore and see my book on the shelves. That was, and now I can. So it's really exciting.
And did you, with that as well, at what point did you kind of feel like you could own the title of being a writer? Is there
I think when I won the Place on London Writers Award, because I'd started A Trace of Sun more than 30 years ago, and it was started off as a memoir, part of my mum's journey, but then I discovered that actually I didn't know very much about it because she didn't talk about it a lot. Then I kept putting it down, changing it. It got quite sinister, then I changed it again. And when I did the London Writers Award, that was when I really, really worked on it fully and started to craft it into what it became. And I think when I've actually finished that final draft, the first draft, I should say, that's when I thought I'm a writer, because I'd done the whole 100,000 words. And at that point, I also got an agent, and it just began to be real at that point.
Yeah. 100,000 words, not to be sniffed at. Kate, I'm just thinking with your background in kind of TV and theatre.
Definitely theatre. I definitely don't have a background in TV, but short film.
Side, has that influenced your the way that you write, or your kind of because it's got a lot of the things that you write, you're very good at dialogue, and I wondered if theatre, having worked in that medium, if that has influenced how you write in long form.
It's really interesting because one of the I've moved publishers actually for this third novel, but I'm working with the same editor that I work with at Hachette too, so at Bonnier. And one of her things she always says is that I write that my dialogue sounds too much like a play or too much like TV. And I'm like, well, it's really interesting because the feedback I get is that from readers is that they like the dialogue. So it's slightly going off piece, but then I wonder, is it because she's pointed out to me that it's too much like a play, repeatedly, that I adjust it, therefore that's why it's good, because so I have to I'm giving a lot of focus to it. I was really aware when I was writing plays that when you write, I tried to write naturalistic language. These were only short plays, I'm not calling myself a playwright, but I was just trying out my craft. And I did that through that and short film to start with. And you can't be naturalistic in a play either. So it's a really weird thing. It's like this liminal, not real. It's not real what we do, what we do. We're trying to capture something, but you're trying to deliver reality or reflect reality. But that's where I find it almost the hardest. But I do think that the plays, my background as an actor has influenced certainly the way that I think of a structure or the way that I think of a scene. And I don't myself in the role of these. Currently, I'm again writing from multiple perspectives, both of the last two novels were, even though it's not so noticeable, perhaps with the Stranding, that's from 4 perspectives, and then this family, as I said, it was from 9 perspectives, then it got squashed down into 7, and I was really keen to like not be reined in and do as many perspectives as I wanted to with this new book. And like, do you think, you know, she asked me one of the horrible questions that editors ask you, is like, do we really think we need all of these characters? It's like, oh, I really want to do it, to try my best to do it. But she's absolutely right. What it's become now is it's such a clearer story. But that comes from acting and playing, particularly in rep was my like background, where you play multiple characters and you might even play different roles in the same play on different nights, which sort of really does sort of start to make you think of the world, or a story rather, not a world, from perspectives. Yeah, I don't know, or maybe that's a telly addict thing as well, seeing things in sort of in sections, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'd ask again, like, you know, that idea of kind of identifying as writer as well, that like, you know, you're working on your third novel at the moment. At what point in your like writing career did you introduce yourself as a writer, for example?
Probably, well, my first deal was done like when my daughter was 2 months old, and just before the pandemic. So by the time the deal was done, I didn't have really that opportunity to like be out and about calling myself a writer. And if I was calling myself a writer, it was sort of in an environment a bit like this, where I'd been asked to do something because my debut was coming out. So I definitely thought of myself as a writer then, but I think I was like dabbling in that when I did the short films. And really the short films thing was just trying to like push, take my identity as an actor and sort of, and I'd done a little bit of directing, and try and like wheedle my way in to being a little bit more in control of the story, which was really interesting. And then I did like a thing with the BFI. I got one of my scripts got a little bit of development, and they kept saying to me, "Oh, yes, I know that you produce and I know that you act, but it's the writing. Concentrate on the writing." And I think maybe that started to lead in. And then it was this thing of like, I'm a solo parent by choice, so my daughter's sperm donor conceived, and there was an awful lot of thought process that went into that. And what it was like a turning point in my life. Like, if I'm not going to get pregnant, you know, after the 7th time of having fertility treatment, if I'm not going to get pregnant, what else am I going to do with my life if I'm not going to be a mother that I always thought I was going to be? And so I was sort of hedging my bets, starting my novel in a way, but it turns out I was pregnant because I started it on the day that I had the fertility treatment that ended up with my daughter. So there you go. Which sounds like I've made it up, but I haven't, I promise you.
That's amazing. I was interested as well because briefly in the green room, Kate and Disha, you were both talking about kind of the sort of the, I guess the urge, the impetus to create when you had newborn, when you were pregnant, when you had newborn children. Disha, do you think that kind of those two things are really linked, that, you know, creating life and then creating work as well?
It must be, if it's happened to so many of us. Yeah, I feel like there was so many things. I think because as a first-time mother, there is this kind of sense of losing one's identity. That's definitely something that I went through. And I just kind of I wasn't living in India. I didn't have that village around me. We were in the middle of the pandemic. There were just so many factors involved in being a mother for the first time in a foreign country, for me. And I felt like I completely lost my sense of self. And then, you know, as a parent, you're almost 100% of yourself is for this child and keeping this child alive. I think I was looking for one thing that was about me, and that kind of proved that I still had something of me in me. And I think that was what was the impetus for me anyway. And also because of the pandemic, I do think that the two things were linked because I literally had nothing else to do other than caring for my child and then maybe dabbling in some writing. But I'd never taken myself seriously as a writer before that. So I think, yeah, having a child definitely instigated something in me. And maybe it was also kind of to prove to my child as well. I don't know what it was. I think it was proving to myself and to my child that I'm still worth something more than just being a mother. I think that's what it was for me.
I'm just so impressed and amazed that you had any capacity to do any of it, because I know that when I had my tiny babies, my brain was complete mush, and it felt very similar kind of going into lockdown. I didn't I kind of lost my reading mojo, like it just so I'm so impressed that you were able to do that.
I do think that I would have written a completely different book under different circumstances. My book is Dirty Laundry is very dark and very sort of and I think it reflects my state of mind at the time. I think if I wrote it now, it would be like all lovely, likable characters who don't hurt each other. Yeah.
I interviewed Sarah Perry the other day, and I asked her like if she had always wanted to write, and she said that she had since she was really small, because she was really aware from a very young age that her time on earth was finite. And it just strikes me that I probably admit that actually through my 20s and my 30s, I hadn't quite grasped that concept, maybe, even though like I lost a really good friend when I was younger. I lived hard rather than strategically, I suppose, or doing what I really wanted to do, or daring to do what I wanted to do. And it strikes me that what all of these things are just whatever, like a sort of wake-up call, be that for you, Pam. By the way, I think that Maya Angelou would be so pleased that that inspired, that inspired you. I think it's really I think it is a little bit of that though as well. It's that going, you have to say sorry to swear, but fuck it. Like, what is there to lose? What have I got to lose? And at different times, it's that daring, isn't it? It's daring to share your work.
Yeah, and I think your writing is so much a part of your identity. And I think part of the reason I probably didn't share my work with anybody for so long was just like, it's just mine. It's just my little thing that I do. And it was a bit strange to kind of open it up to the rest of the world. But obviously it has to be done in the end. But I think that's probably why it took so long.
It continues to be something that you Sorry. I was just going to say that it continues to be something that you have to navigate, because obviously your identity is bound up in your words, but once you put them out into the world, it is no longer yours, and people's opinions on it are not necessarily what your intentions were, blah blah blah, and it's also work, blah blah blah, and so you have to untangle your identity from what has to be when you sit at the keyboard. It has to be something of you, but you have to remove yourself from it, I think, as well. That's that part of being a writer too.
Yeah, but then you also have that thing of that's fair. When I first started writing, it was like whatever I wrote, people are going to think I'm writing about me. That used to put me off as well, because like I just want to create something completely mad or whatever. But we'll always think, oh, so you're writing about you then, and it's like, oh, yeah, that
only things you've written about them. There's that as well. Or they see themselves in your book all the time. Yeah.
I mean, on that, Pam, when you're saying, like with the book that you're writing, having had such a long relationship with your novel, how did it feel like when it was out in the world? Like, when it's no longer private, when it becomes a shared experience?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think because I spent so long writing it, and then even though it's based on family experience, a lot of the actual real bits are so wrapped up in fiction that there are some bits I can't actually remember which bits I made up and which bits happened. So it was then easier to let it go because I had completely fictionalized everything so much.
Yeah, it's interesting, that thing as well of people seeing themselves but yeah, partly thinking it's about yourself, but also then kind of projecting themselves onto things as well. There's kind of, yes, there's a certain element of that, I think, with all art, but yeah, especially with writing, people like to think they might have ended up in their book, in your book somewhere. Kate, have you found that at all with this family, the fact that you've got multiple characters? Are people seeing themselves in your stories?
Yes. No, yes. I mean, people do say like, which one's you? And that's you. And people, obviously, with the Stranding, in a lot of interviews, people called me Ruth, which is the lead character's name. And I was like, it's not me. But anyway, but obviously she's a woman of a certain age, and I used a lot of my experiences to build her, but as in the fact that she lived in London and stuff like that, but she isn't me. But there is this, it's an opportunity to not be yourself, but also to explore other existences, which I always sort of enjoyed about acting as well. But I'm going to have to, I've been trying to search in my brain for the name of the book and the author, but who wrote Olive Kitteridge?
Elizabeth Strout.
Thank you. So Elizabeth Strout in I Am Lucy Barton. There we go. Thank goodness. In I Am Lucy Barton, she has the whole sort of dialogue with another author or a writer that is a proper writer before she was a proper writer in the past. And there's so much in those short conversations, be that in a dress shop or at the writer's workshop or whatever, which is about don't sort of like let anyone into how much is, don't ever have to justify yourself to the reader about what is you and what is not you, and what is your opinion and what is not your opinion, and all of these things. And reading that, I just felt like a light sort of went on a bit, because like Pam says, by the time you get to putting, there might be even just like in an experience which you haven't had, you might have put a molecule of your own personal response to another event, or there might be someone that you started off with as a sort of like outline based on someone that you'd met once, but by the time you get there, they have become almost solid to you, these characters, and they are not real, but they have become almost realer. I suppose it's the same thing I was just saying about dialogue. It's not because you're trying to capture something that isn't really there. You're trying to encapsulate an idea, I guess, to a certain extent as well. I don't know, but yeah, that's that book, I think, on that subject, for lots of other reasons as well, because she's quite masterful, isn't she? Is also, that's a really good thing to read as a writer, I think, for that reason.
Yeah, actually, I found.
Could you put the name of that in the chat so that everyone's got it?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
But do you find writing, when I writing like a male character, I found almost easier?
Oh, you love it.
Because then I didn't have to worry about anybody thinking, oh, no, which bits are real, which bits are which bits are not. And then I could just really think, how would he really feel? How would he do this? How would that come across? And really kind of delve into him and make him real.
You don't have the responsibility to represent. Yeah.
I love writing men, but maybe it's partly for that reason. But I also think it's also slightly because it's the freedom to play, right, I guess, and doing that sort of unlocks it in other characters, but then that can be also putting them in a different position. I don't know. Yeah, it's the play. I love reading stuff where I can see the writer playing, and because that's where I like to write as well. Really, where playing with the characters.
We've got a question from one of our audience, Tracy, who has asked, please can I ask what value you place on writing short stories to try and make yourself known through competitions and articles, even if this takes time away from the novel? So Pam, could I ask that of you?
Yeah, I quite enjoy writing short stories. I think it's a really good way of just doing something different can actually inspire what you are writing anyway, and just making yourself write from different perspectives is that challenge of making it short form is really, yeah, I think it's really useful. And I don't think it matters whether you win them or not. I think that the practice itself is really good. It's a really good habit to get into.
I
I
remember.
I think just the having a deadline is, I think, quite useful.
Yeah,
Even
and
if
writing
the-
within, 2,000 words or 5,000 words or whatever it is, and you have to, having to put all that information and all that feeling and all the imagery, everything into a short form. It's quite hard. It's hard to do. So yeah, it's really good practice, and I will always write short stories as well.
I suppose the only thing that we are all everybody, we all do it as humans, is to sort of put things off or procrastinate, I suppose. And I suppose one thing, the short story form is so hard as well, isn't it? I mean, it's an art form within itself, so there is a part of you that might get dissuaded or get caught up with trying to master that. And if your aim is to be if it is important for you for your work to be published, then are you building a collection, or like, if it's for your own pleasure, absolutely. But as far as like competitions and stuff are concerned, there are quite a few out there for novels as well. So if your aim is to write a novel, I do think we only have so much time, like in each day on this earth, depending on, and certainly, around our day jobs. And I do think, like, if it's because of time that you're writing short stories, because you think it takes less time, I'm not sure that it necessarily does, because you can segment a novel and try and get there that way too. I mean, it just depends on what your art form is. But I suppose I would encourage anyone that wants to write a novel to write the novel, if that's what you want to do, and break it down into short, manageable chunks so that you feel as though you're achieving something, I suppose, if that's what the writing a short story is for. But that's a big question.
Yeah, Disha, is that you? Do you also write short stories as well, or do you maybe kind of like plan to write novels?
Yeah, I agree with Kate, actually, because for years I did write short stories and submit to anthologies and competitions while I had the tech day job, because that was sort of my only outlet to kind of write. And absolutely, Kate, because I couldn't never finish a novel, because it almost became a habit to be able to write a quick short story out and send it out to competitions. And it wasn't until I stopped doing that I was able to finish writing a novel, because I'd always stop at the sort of 10,000 word mark with every novel that I started, because I just couldn't bring myself to write a full length book. And it might work for some people. I think it's great writing practice. But I don't know. For me, it didn't work. And like you were saying, the style of a short story is so very different from a novel. I think there are short story writers and then there are novelists, and they are two separate art forms, in my opinion. And you could either be brilliant at writing a novel or you could be brilliant at writing a short story. There are very few people who are good at both, I think. So yeah.
But again, Pam took a long time mastering,
Yeah.
no, but it's true though. I'm a relatively short experience, and I suppose, yeah, I daren't. I've tried. I've written one,
Yeah.
short story. So that's why I say what I say. But yeah.
Mm.
We've got another question that's I feel it sort of ties in with this, and Kate's saying that when you feel inspired by a big idea or place concept, how do you narrow down all of the strands to one cohesive plot or theme, or do you always know what you're trying to say with your book when you start it? Disha, can I start with you, because I think that's kind of it sort of carries on from is it lots of short stories or is it one thing?
I suppose I've kind of tackled each book in very different ways. And with the first book, it was definitely a scene that I had in mind. It's a scene where one of the friends is found dead in her house. And that's the scene that kind of almost cinematically was kind of replaying in my mind over and over again. And that's where the book came from. And then I developed the characters and the story and the plot points. Then with the second book, which is coming out next year, that was the book that I kind of drew inspiration from India and trying to transport the atmosphere and the feelings that I get in India to Ireland. And I suppose with the third book, I don't even know because I've just started. I think it's I think with each project, things just go differently, at least for me. And it's important for me to kind of have a very visual representation of what the setting and the characters are going to be. If I can't see the faces of my characters and kind of hear their voices in my head, I don't know if I could write that book. And that's kind of like, even over the story or the plot. I'm not a plotter, I don't plot my books out. So for me, certainly it's a very visual, sort of emotional inspiration for me, and that's where it kind of comes together then. Yeah.
Pam, I want to quickly kind of ask you that the same thing, but I've only just noticed the time that we're nearly out. So
Okay. I think it depends. I mean, I will sometimes start with a particular scene that is like the kind of the crux of what I want to write about, and that might begin at the start of the book and later end up at the end of the book. But that's the thing that everything else is kind of built around. So then I might start with it and think, well, how did it get to this point? And then where is it going to lead to afterwards? But I kind of need to have one thing that I feel like this is really what I want to explore. And that's something that can be hard to pin down. But as you write, that might change. But I just think like with A Trace of Sun, the opening scene originally was Rafe receiving a letter from his mum when this was now is near the end of the book. But for a long time, that was where it started. And then it was flashbacks for everything else. But then it moved. But that was still like a really important part of the story with that. The story needed that to exist. So I think, yeah, one big idea is a great starting point. But how do we get to that point? And then how do we move on from it? It is kind of how your book comes together.
Mhm.
and that can be a different thing for kind of each different project. I think that's
Yeah.
It's quite encouraging to kind of hear that, you know, each project is a thing in of itself.
Kate, can we ask you as well? But we're going to have it in a bullet point.
Yeah, no, the bullet point is really that I have a sort of, I suppose with both, with all three of my books, there was a sort of like a sort of structural sort of vision. And I was sort of thinking, what is this about? Like, what is this about? What are there were lots of things that it was about. And then I just sort of like write in the dark. I don't even know what my characters sort of look like or who they are. I'm trying to write them, I suppose, because it starts at a very sort of like social commentary sort of level, and then hopefully becomes a real human story rather than just being sort of like a pointy finger discussion of society. But I start at that place of like drawing the outlines of figures and thinking about ideas, but up until right to the end, I think I can be asking myself, oh, is that what it's about? I can be discovering I'm in this very last draft. Oh, that's what I was writing about. As long as I get out of my way and write all of the shit down that looks like is actually, you know, shit, then from within that, I start to see the patterns in my editing process. And that's the joy and the juice. And to be honest, the really fucking hard work. God, I've sworn a lot. I apologize.
No, I think that's a brilliant place to kind of enter that, get it all down, and there's somewhere between it all, like the magic of the story comes about. It has been an absolute joy and a privilege to be speaking with you all this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading and for your honesty and for sharing your experience. There's some really lovely comments that are coming out in the chat. And just to say for everybody that's listening, we also have a Forthwrite podcast, and we have interviewed all three of these fantastic writers for this season's podcast. Pam's episode is already out, and Disha's and Kate's will be coming out soon. So please find us, listen to us on however you normally access your podcasts. Can we also say thank you to the Arts Council, who are our funders for this, and thank you to you all as well for listening and being so brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.